All right. Well, issues management's a name that's been given to an important part of public relations that actually goes back to the dawn of public relations in the early 20th century. It got its name, though, only in 1976 when a man named Howard Chase gave a name to a practice which he called issues management, which was actually what a lot of the forefathers and foremothers of public relations had been doing all along. He thought it was important for a company to take control of its relationship with public opinion. And so he regarded issues as being the blips in public opinion that a company might face. Sometimes today they've grown so big they might be more like icebergs than blips. But Howard Chase said, you know, what a company has to do is not wait until public opinion has crystallized against it, or disapproval has crystallized against it, and it results in legislation or it results in regulation that fits like a straitjacket on the company. So he proposed that companies do something called issues management, which he said was really like a proactive, and I don't really like the word proactive, but it was Howard's word, a way of proactively trying to anticipate how public opinion is changing, particularly as it might disapprove of a company, of its products, its services, or its behavior, or of its values, and take advantage of trying to relate to those people who are dissatisfied or unhappy. Because we know that issues grow out of people who are disappointed. Their expectations about a company were not met, whether it's the products or the way it treats its employees or the effect it has on the environment, whether it pays its taxes or not, whether or not it moves its employees overseas in order to build products more cheaply. All of these things, plus many others, are sources of disappointment to people. And as public opinion forms around these blips, they then can become much bigger blips, and in time they become icebergs, which can really wreck a company or wreck its fate. So what Howard Chase thought was companies need to have a planning process that will match up to the strategic planning process. The strategic planning process, Howard would say, is for profits. That's how you plan to make profits. The issues management process is to influence policymakers, those people who control the environment in which a company would operate. And that practice, which Howard thought of as issues management, has now changed dramatically. It's become very closely aligned today with what's called reputational management, because the issues that cause a problem for a company, in fact, alter its reputation, influence its reputation, therefore they influence the trust factor, they influence the authenticity of the enterprise, and they influence all of the various stakeholders who have a stake in that company's success or who will be losers if the company fails. Now, issues management, I said, really had its roots going back to the beginning of the 19th century. And it's very true, and it's illustrated, I think, carefully, and I'd like to elaborate this a little bit, by a statement in 1887 by a very famous baron, William H. Vanderbilt, the founder of the New York Central Railroad. And he gave an opinion about public opinion that's often quoted. Commodore Vanderbilt, as he was called, said, "The public be damned." And that was the controlling idea about companies and their relationship with public opinion for many years, because he simply felt it wasn't any of the public's business. Business was the private sector. What we do is our business. The only people possibly affected might be our customers, or it may be our investors, or it might be our employees. And so this idea took root in a lot of thinking about companies in the private sector, and it holds forward even until today. Right here in the University of Chicago, the Chicago School of Economics thinking offered by Milton Friedman, which controlled for a long time in this country, said the business of business is business. And the only thing important might be the employees, it might be the customers, or it might be the investors. As long as the employees are happy and they're making a product or providing a service, and there are customers for those products or services who are happy with the products or services, And of course, the way this story goes, as long as there are very passive investors, not activists, but passive investors who are happy just to make their regular dividend from the profits of the company, then that's all that matters. What happened, though, probably is suggested better by the statement of Arthur W. Page, who, as far as we know, was the first corporate vice president of public relations at any major company. He was at AT&T, which during the time he was there became the world's largest company. In 1947, about 60 years after the Commodore statement, Arthur Page said, "All business in a democratic society begins with public approval and continues with public permission." So the approval and permission process represented a big change between Vanderbilt's day and Page's day. What was the change? The change was the emergence of public opinion, informed public opinion, which was shaped by the growth of mass media, large newspapers, in time large television, and then after large radio. Large newspapers and large radio, and after Page's day, of course, the television networks themselves would have considerable influence all across the country in small hamlets and villages and small towns, as well as in large cities. So that we had in the United States, because of the mass media, we had the growth of large blocks of public opinion shaped by the media. What Page came to recognize is that no company could afford the luxury of saying the public be damned anymore, because sooner or later, public opinion will work its way through the legislative process, through the governmental processes, to bring about what we would think of today as the social control of a private sector business. It will ultimately call into account in the court of public opinion, and from the court of public opinion to the legislative arena, some resolution when the public becomes dissatisfied, when they expect more from a company than what they're getting. They expect different values, they expect better products, they expect better working conditions for employees. So this big change created an environment that we now refer to today as the age of attitudes, where attitudes have become important, and so the right to privacy, taking care of the environment, not being greedy, compensating officials overgenerously, putting the interest of the management ahead of the interest of the customers or of the public or of employees. There is a whole list of problems today that companies face, and those problems become issues. And how a company aligns itself to anticipate the issues, not to wait until there's already legislation introduced, but to align itself in advance, to anticipate what the issues are going to be, and in effect monitor what public opinion is becoming, and take some action to do something about it. So what Howard Chase named issues management was really just the evolution of the practice of public relations, but putting it into a positive, as Howard would say, proactive position of anticipating what's on the horizon and making changes in the company. But you might ask, what kinds of changes? Well, in the early days of public relations, we thought the kinds of changes would be just to communicate more effectively about why the company was doing what it's doing. So, all right, we pollute a little water here and there. It's necessary. You know, you have to break an egg to make an omelet kind of philosophy. What we, of course, have discovered as public opinion has become increasingly important is that, in fact, sometimes it's necessary for the company to, in all honesty, take a hard look at itself. Maybe it needs to change a policy. Maybe it needs to change a procedure. Maybe it needs to change its value. Sometimes maybe it needs to improve the product. Maybe the product really is deficient. Maybe the product has unintended consequences that are damaging to the customer or to the environment. All of these things then have to do with the fact that a company today, when you look at it, exists in terms of its communications in three levels, three dimensions. First of all, it communicates directly through the products and the services that it makes. There's no question about that. People who use its products and services have a very direct connection, and they have an opinion about those things. They either like them or they don't like them. They think they're good, they think they're bad. Secondly, it communicates through the way it behaves while it makes and markets those products. Is it a leader? Is it concerned about the environment? What are its values? Does it act on those values, or is it simply a commercial transaction kind of a business just trying to make money for the sake of making money? Thirdly, it communicates through the organized way that it presents itself to the various audiences that it needs to connect with. And those are the ways we think of as advertising or public relations or public affairs or direct marketing and so on. Now, what happened between the time of Arthur Page and our day now in the 21st century is that we have learned that we can't communicate our way out of issues, that it takes more than just trying to communicate to tell our story. What we have to do is learn to listen. We have to pay attention to what those people who have issues with us, what they're saying and why they're saying it. And we have to try to find a way to address those issues, to take them into account, to educate them, and to find some common ground that we can relate on so that our business will be conducted in such a way that it satisfies those people who have concerns. Now, we've given a name to those people, and it's become very important. In the last 15 years, this name has become dominant. We call them stakeholders. We used to talk about shareholders, and we would say, well, the first interest of any company, particularly one that's publicly traded, is to put the shareholders first. Improving shareholder value was at the top of the list. Now, however, we've learned that it is the opinion and the attitude of all of the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are very different from the public. The public is kind of a huge amorphous mass. Stakeholders are specific groups of people. Principal stakeholders, of course, would be the employees to begin with, the investors in the company, the management of the company, the customers of the company. Those would be principal primary stakeholders. But then you're going to have the media who write and cover the company. You're going to have community leaders where the company has businesses, operations, its plants or its headquarters. You're going to have governmental officials, regulators, legislators. You're going to have activist groups, shareholder activist groups, consumer activist groups. And I could go through a whole long list of people who are the stakeholders. The second big change that's come about, besides recognizing these attitudes and organizing them by stakeholder groups, is a change in the media and the way the media does its business. We used to think of the media as being a mass media. It was a giant organization that touched the lives of people wherever they might happen to be. Today we recognize a different kind of media, and it's called a social media. So today you can have a blogger, for instance, who is able to access the internet or through a micro blogging technology like Twitter, can be able to create a whole following who may have thousands of followers and people who pay attention to what this person says. And if this person is unhappy about a company's products or its values or its performance, the way it treats its employees, it can influence people who will be activists themselves. So social media has changed a lot the way companies now have to connect with stakeholders. And so what this has done for public relations is created a new tool, really, a new dimension, because it offers now people who want to deal with, and we might say it this way, the people who have to manage the shareholder relationships of a company now have a new tool, a tool which they can use to build better direct connections with stakeholders than they could in the past, because we no longer have to go through mediated messages through the mass media. We can now directly access stakeholder groups and influence their opinion and influence the information they have about us in order to build a direct relationship with them. Then finally, the third big change is an intensive focus these days on what we call strategic management. That is to say, that's different from management strategies. It is to say today that management itself wants to see the company unified around a common strategy. It wants to have everybody singing out of the same page of the hymnal at the same time. And so it means then that people who do public relations have to find a strategic positioning within the company that connects them and unites them with the business strategy of the organization. And that doing so and building it and leveraging it around stakeholder relationships is very important. I like to think that in the early days of public relations, it was thought of more as publicity, media relations, if you will, maybe employee communications, maybe some marketing public relations. But in 1965, and then in the 70s, with the emergence of public affairs, that's the use of public relations tactics to influence governmental actions, governmental outcomes, the growth of public affairs helped to move public relations more into a central positioning in terms of the priorities of top management. The evolution of issues management today into what I'm calling reputation management has made this even more central to the key focus of the top management of an organization, because managing these stakeholder relations, having a plan to deal with them in advance, to diffuse them, to keep it from turning into a crisis. This is what I like to say that good issues management does, is it in terms of looking at the reputation of the organization, it tries to anticipate what will become reputational problems if these issues are not dealt with. That's the line you need to use to find a way to determine if an issue is important or not. Are these stakeholders, this stakeholder group, are they critical and important to the reputation of the organization and therefore to its ability to operate, its license, the public permission, public approval dimension of Arthur Page's statement? If they are critical and if they're important, then top management has to be made aware of that. They have to understand the criticality of this stakeholder group or of this group of stakeholders. And they have to be able to then pay attention to what needs to be done in advance of it becoming a crisis. So a part of the point of issues management is to not let something begin to become a boiling pot, but rather to take some action in advance to keep that from happening. I like to say it's a little like the book, How You Grow Asparagus. The first sentence of the book, How You Grow Asparagus, says, dig a trench 3 years ago. What you need to do to grow asparagus, of course, is you have to wait 3 years before you get a crop, but you have to start in advance. Managing issues means you have to be scanning the horizon, paying attention all the time for those blips, for the problems that are out there that can become the big icebergs that can do damage to the company's reputation. So you need a process for scanning that. You need a process then for analyzing those issues as you see them and deciding which ones of these are going to be important, which ones do we deal with now in the short term, which ones do we monitor because they're not yet critical, and which ones are perhaps either something we can't do anything about for now and we have to wait a while. So that's what issues managers do. They look at something through the filter of the reputation of the company. They try to decide, is it a threat? Is it a problem? If so, what do we need to be doing about it? When do we need to be doing it? How will we know it makes a difference? But most importantly, they perform a function for the top management that keeps them in touch with what's happening in the external environment. A lot of people think of public relations as being a broadcasting facility, getting the word out. And frankly, the top management of a lot of companies see it that way. How do we tell our story? Let's get our story out there. The key issue to being very good at reputation management and at issues management is understanding that one of the most important functions that these people play, the managers in charge of this place, they bring the outside in. They put it on the table. They tee up the subjects that management needs to know about. Oftentimes those things are bad news. They're problems. They're something that people don't like to deal with, but you need to address them in advance. Another key issue in terms of the value of reputation management and issues management, though, is not just mitigating a problem, not just mitigating a risk. It's also knowing sometimes that your reputation is very strong and that you can take advantage of your reputation to deal with a problem because you have a strong reputation. So you want to look at reputation as an asset. You want to look at it as something that has to be managed like an asset. And there are times when you have to take a chance on your asset. There are times when you have to believe that your reputation is strong enough that you can make a change, that you can take bold and decisive action, and that people have such a high level of trust in you and your organization that they will follow, that they will come through with it. On other times, if you run the risk, though, of not mitigating challenges to your reputation, then you roll the dice with your reputation. You take a chance with public opinion, and that way you could damage your reputation. So in thinking about risk and risk management to reputation, which is where I think we're going to go in the future of what started off that we called issues management. In thinking about the future of issues management, I believe that reputation management at an organization will ultimately become a part of enterprise risk management. Until now, risk management in a company usually means managing financial risks, and it's done a lot by the accountants in the financial department, or it means managing compliance risk. Are we complying with all the regulations that we're meant to comply with? Or are we walking the line, taking a dangerous position which may put our company in some jeopardy? I believe that the importance of public opinion, public approval, and public permission has become dominant. Now, reputation is an intangible. We're trying to find ways to make it more tangible. It is clearly the blank on the balance sheet of many companies, but nonetheless, it's there. Companies with strong reputations find it easier to hire and keep good people. They find it easier to extend their business into different lines of business. They find it easier to go through a crisis because they've built up trust with the key stakeholder audiences that they need. On the other hand, companies who do not manage their reputation risk very carefully can find themselves getting deeply into trouble. Think about what happened to Netflix just recently, though it's not in the chapter, when they simply overreached in terms of what their customers were willing to put up with or what they expected from a company like that. So if you look at reputational risk as something to be managed, as compliance risk will be managed or financial risk will be managed, then I think you will see in time that top management will begin to combine the functions of reputational risk management, compliance risk management, and financial risk management into what would be called enterprise risk management. And that very often in that case, public relations people will be expected to take the lead, to be in charge, because the reputation is very critical to the success of a company going forward in this very attitude-intensive environment. A big question I have, and I in the chapter on this note though, is that managing risk also requires someone who is willing to take a risk when there is a positive benefit. It's a risk-reward ratio thing. So people who manage financial risk or who manage compliance risk, they're also always looking for a competitive advantage in the risk. They may say, you know, it's true we're taking a risk, but the reward payoff for this risk, if we're successful, will substantially outweigh the downside, the potential loss. I'm not sure people in public relations have this kind of skill or this kind of training to deal with risk. In some cases, my experience, and I've been a management consultant in this field for 25 years now, and I work inside a company and I work with the people who do the corporate public relations. I don't represent companies in a public forum the way a public relations agency would. I work inside the company, so I get to know what the top management wants and expects from public relations people, and I get to know quite a bit about the people who lead the public relations function. My reservation about public relations leadership as we emerge into enterprise risk management, in which reputational risk management would be a key factor, would be that many of them are averse to risk. their answer to too many things is no. So rather than looking at a problem that may be a reputational risk issue and being able to see what the trade-offs are on one side or the other, sometimes will keep them from managing reputation as an asset. Managing reputation as an asset is different from just mitigating the risk to reputation that may be there in terms of public attitudes or in terms of stakeholder relations. What is really in the big picture of things, for what purpose is an enterprise managed? What is its objective long term? And I think the answer to that, truthfully, is that it needs to be in the public interest. That's the reason the public permission and public approval is so significant. It's true we recognize private enterprise, but in these days, particularly in the Western countries, host nations have expectations of private corporations and private entities that go beyond just the material well-being of making goods and products or paying your taxes. They expect them to be performers who will contribute to the welfare of society. And this is really the question that Drucker was looking at the end of his book, The Practice of Management in 1954. When he asked the question, and he quoted an English pamphleteer, look it up, named de Mandeville, who said that actually it's private vices that become public virtue. In other words, it's the fact that companies may be privately and selfishly focused in competition with each other that will ultimately result in the public good, and something good coming from this. And Drucker concludes that that might have been good during the day of robber barons, or it might have been a good way of thinking about it in the late 19th century when de Mandeville wrote that. But Drucker says the genius of the capitalist democratic system is in the fact that you have to manage the private enterprise in terms of the public interest in order to be successful. And that's because he recognized, just as Arthur Page said it so clearly long ago, without public permission and without public approval, your company eventually will be toast, because you can't get by without a license to operate, and that license to operate ultimately comes from the social control, as it will be exercised through the government, through the legislative bodies or the executive branch of the government. And the people's approval and the people's permission will ultimately drive the fate of any company. That's it. Is it too long?
You literally answered every question I would have asked.
Ah, good. Good.
So I would have asked about the